Hey guys, apparently 21st Reaction has a problem with me saying hello to my audience. I don't know what's the issue with that is, but 21st Reaction has been ruthlessly mocking me for simply saying the phrase "Hey guys." So, what would you like to say for that 21st?
I would like to say it's not really the phrase, it's more of your voice where you do it in this low tone. Hey guys. But what I actually want to mention just at the beginning of the stream is that Pseudo Pilled has this book club that he's been organizing and consolidating for quite a while. So the book server that Seller linked very graciously in the chat is a gateway into that. It's a filtering vetting server. So if anybody's interested in those reactionary book clubs, Pseudo Pilled's building a roster, and they're going to actually start new groups starting on the 20th. They already have certain topics that they already have. And he also wanted me to mention that they also are considering to have a chess tournament as a fun, conventional, recreational thing. So just take interest into that. Please join it for Pseudo's sake. And thanks so much for that.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like I should also mention that this channel's been kind of dead recently. So I don't know. Sorry about that. I'm trying to get back to making regular content. Just been really busy recently. So hopefully there'll be another video, a new actual video, not live stream, this week. Man, I haven't seen this channel in ages. I mean, it's not that long. It's only been like a month since my last video. I did the Canada Day live stream. But yeah,
Dominion Day.
Yeah, Dominion Day. But yeah, so yeah, hopefully, I don't know, hopefully I'll have more content on this channel. Can't really guarantee that, to be honest, though. But yeah, so today it's been about 3 weeks now, I think, since the most recent motu proprio, or since the motu proprio came from Pope Francis on the issue of the Latin Mass, and I know that it really caused a big stir in Catholic circles. And that it seems like one of the biggest news events in Catholic circles for quite a while now. And a lot of people were freaking out when it first happened. And I think still now most people aren't really sure what the motu proprio means for Catholics. What's happening to the Latin Mass? Is it going to continue to be offered? What's like the long-term plan here? What's the short-term plan? And honestly, I don't understand a lot of stuff. I read the document. It didn't really make that much sense to me. I mean, I'm no expert, so that's not a surprise. These documents aren't usually written for lay people. But still, it all does seem kind of confusing. But in my, I mean, I do not attend a Latin Mass regularly. I've been to the Latin Mass before, but it's not the regular Mass that I attend. But in my experience, what I've seen just from friends online so far is that it doesn't seem like local Latin masses are being restricted very much. So, Alan Rule, you're kind of our expert on this tonight. What exactly does the motu proprio mean, and what does it mean for Latin Mass access in the future?
Well, if you read the motu proprio, you can read it. It basically you can get one thing out of it, and that is that Pope Francis does not like the Latin Mass or the people that attend the Latin Mass. So he wants to put restrictions. And now the thing that's confusing about this document is it's a word salad. There's all this weird stuff. No one can make heads or tails out of it. It's like it can't be in a parochial parish, and just so many anomalies that we don't know what they mean. Like, it came out on a Friday, I think, the motu proprio. I go to church that Sunday. I'm talking to my priest. He's Fraternity of St. Peter. And I'm asking him all these questions. And he's like, what? It's kind of like he doesn't know. And then he's like, until I hear otherwise, I'm just going to continue. Now, I don't think this is going to affect fraternity churches or Institute of Christ the King or similar groups. Because, I mean, they could only be in the diocese at the mercy of the bishop to begin with. And I think, I can't prove this, but well, I'll explain that in a second. My theory is that Pope Francis wants to end the Latin Mass movement, and so he tried this. I don't think Francis is a smart guy, because if you wanted to end the Latin Mass movement, you don't do this, because he essentially gained nothing and made a bunch of people more angry at him. Not just the Latin Mass folk, but there's people who attend Novus Ordo who are like, why are you doing this? You know, these people just want to go to this Mass that they love. And like, I personally thought, I can't prove this, I personally thought that he as in Pope Francis, thought about half of the Latin Masses would disappear inside of a week. I honestly thought he would do that. But no, like all the people I know online who live in Canada, the States, in England, France, Latin America, the people I know who were going to Latin Mass are still going to Latin Mass. A few Latin Masses have disappeared in the States, but I don't think there's been a diocese that's gone from Latin Mass to no Latin Mass. Like there's that one diocese in the South, I think it was Little Rock, Arkansas. I may be wrong on that, but it's in the South though. And they had 5 Latin Masses, 2 fraternity, 3 were done by diocesan priests. And the bishop axed the 3 diocesan ones, but he's keeping the fraternity. So there's still Latin Mass available. I know no one. In fact, I think I'd ask all the people on the panel and all the people in the chat if they know someone who had a Latin Mass who no longer has one. Because I don't think I think 98% of the people who were attending Latin Mass still have it. So Francis has gained almost nothing. He's exposed himself. He's shown his hand. So we all know what he's about now. He can't skirt around his issue. And he's made a lot of enemies, not just trads, but a lot of just normal Catholics who don't like what's going on. And yeah, he's completely shown his hand and basically accomplished almost nothing. And the thing that's interesting, as soon as it happened, and in the days since, the people on the far left, the Jesuits and the modernists, and mainly the Jesuits, you don't see them jumping up and down because they know this is going to backfire. Heck, I knew it was going to backfire. If you go on my YouTube channel, the day it came out, I read this thing, I laughed. I'm like, this is going to backfire. And so basically what Francis has set out to accomplish, he has not accomplished, but he's made his situation far worse. Pretty much things are going to continue as they are. So yeah, that's my input on the. Does anyone here know anyone who has lost their Latin Mass since the Motu proprio?
I know of nobody. I've talked to. I have a feeling that at least there are going to be people who I formerly knew, if they're even still in the country. But what I would really say is that when I read the Motu proprio, and when I went over the letter, I came away with a different impression from what you had, Al. The impression I got is that it was essentially a blank check that was given to the bishops and given to, I think it was like congregation leaders of various religious orders, to go via the Holy See and to basically crack down on problem parishes. That's how I read it at the very least. So I'm not sure I agree with the idea that he's completely squishing the Latin Mass. That's obviously failed if that was his attempt. But I think it does certainly give a blank check to crack down on particularly bad parishes.
Well, I suppose that the thing that sort of confused me the most from the Motu proprio, and like I said, like I'm no expert in this stuff. I don't have any sort of formal or even really informal training on how to properly read these documents. And I know these documents are meant for like people that do have proper training. So the language very well could just be going over my head. But it really appeared to me to say in one line that it would no longer be permitted to have Latin Mass at parishes that also offer the Novus Ordo Mass. And that seemed like a very strange restriction for me, because the argument seems to be from Pope Francis, an argument that I'm very sympathetic with, that there are some very disloyal trad Catholics in certain parts of the Latin Mass community. But it doesn't seem at all plausible to me that the most disloyal Catholics would be the ones at parishes that offer both the ordinary and extraordinary forms of the Mass. So I don't know if I'm just misreading this part of the document.
I think you did,
but
yeah.
This seems like an odd restriction.
Yeah, I
So
think you did misread it.
I just want to add something though. In terms of who exactly is being allowed to crack down on what, are there bishops who might need this to crack down on problem parishes? I don't know why this was necessary though. Bishops don't need. If bishops believe that parishes are being problematic, then they don't really need something like this. They could just crack down on them anyway. That's the first thing. The second thing is, assuming that it does, and they do need this to crack down on problem parishes, it also opens the floodgates for very anti-Latin Mass, anti-trad, hostile liberal bishops to crack down on dioceses that do have the Latin Mass and they just don't like it. And there are those in the ranks. Like, even if that was Francis's intent, just to let bishops crack down on problem parishes, then he's being very ignorant of the fact that there are liberal bishops who would love nothing more than just to use this as an excuse to attack the traditional Mass as it stands. And unfortunately, that's what happened. Unfortunately, that's what could very well happen.
Yeah, I'm sure that that was the case, but this is for the entire world, and not everywhere is going to be the same. You know, I don't really have much else to really say. It really depends on the particular bishop.
Okay, but like John Fisher was saying, he's giving a lot of rope to these local bishops to just essentially like disband diocesan Latin masses anywhere, even without like a supposed reason. I mean, obviously they can say out of concern for the well-being of the laity there, and to make sure that they are keeping to Orthodox doctrine and everything. Obviously they can say that, but obviously they would just, if they didn't like the Latin Mass, they would shut it down. So I mean, there's a lot of places like this. Of course, it hasn't played out yet where all those places that could be shut down by liberal bishops have been shut down, but it's definitely a possibility. And I would think that, Pope Francis is more well-connected and familiar with the opinions of those liberal bishops and, like people like Cardinal Supich or Archbishop Gregory. Like, he's familiar with their sentiments and what they would want to do with that.
In fairness, there are thousands of bishops.
Yes, but right. But what about
I mean,
there's
got to take
different gradations. There's different gradations of Archbishop Gregory is not the same level as, or of notoriety or connectedness as a bishop in Kansas, for example.
Well, I think Archbishop Gregory's allowing his Latin Mass to continue, right? Like, I don't think the average bishop cares. Like, say he's pretty liberal, and there's a lot of them in Canada and the States. I don't think they care if there's a single Latin Mass in their diocese. They'd care if there was 5, but if there's 1, they don't care. And they normally bring in a lot of cash for the diocese too. I've heard that from inside people. I don't want to give my source. But I don't think most bishops care about 1 or even 2 Latin Masses in the diocese. I'm sure there's some freaky liberals who do, but that's
hey, we've been joined by an additional member, Hassan. I know him. I know Hassan from Twitter and Discord, and just invite him if he had anything else to say. I saw him in the chat here. Hello, Hassan.
Good evening. I guess the first thing that I want to add is that I don't think that the intent is to crush the Latin Mass for its own sake.
Sorry, you're a bit quiet.
Okay.
Is anyone else
Let
noticing
me try
that?
and fix this.
He sounds all right to me.
I could hear him.
Yeah, same here.
Okay, I mean, I could hear him just seemed a lot quieter than everyone else.
He's a bit soft-spoken.
Okay.
I think that's all.
Okay.
All right. Is that any better?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's loud enough.
Okay. So first of all, I don't think that the aim is to kind of squash the Latin Mass for its own sake. I do think, though, based upon the accompanying letter and also a reading and a sort of study of the literature around Summorum Pontificum and its accompanying letter, that there is a particular sort of subculture that's grown up in the Latin Church, in particular dioceses, not all, but in particular dioceses, and sometimes in particular parishes, that fits the bill for what Francis is talking about. Is it as extensive as he claims? Maybe not. Or at least as he implies, maybe not. Is it really something that he should be going after when there's so many other problems? Maybe not. But is it a legitimate ecclesiological question, which I guess we can leave open to everybody else? I think it probably is, that there's a genuine problem of a practical application of our ecclesiology going on here.
So I'm curious, Hassan, could you give us an example of that?
Sure. I don't really like throwing particular communities under the bus, but Computing the Soul here, I'm friends with him, and
Maybe you don't want to.
I will not be giving any specifics, but
Thank you. Don't.
We're all friends. We're all friends. That's what he meant. We're all very friendly.
Yay!
Right. Well, we've seen parishes where there have been things like this, and we know lots of individuals who are from parishes where lots of these sentiments are normal, and not only in the SSPX, not only attendees of SSPX masses. It's not the case. There are lots of people who attend the FSSP. We know of FSSP priests who've said particular things. I've heard many things from people who are in touch with seminarians and people who've been in touch with seminarians but aren't anymore, and so on, who have said that that the FSSP will basically blacklist you if you say that you're willing to offer the Novus Ordo and you go to their seminaries, despite the fact that Summorum Pontificum's accompanying letter explicitly said that people will not be saying the TLN without not basically making an exception for the Novus Ordo and refusing to basically be educated in or to be willing to say the Roman Rite according to its current use.
Yeah, I mean, I know just one public example of that, at least, was, of course, back earlier on in the whole lockdown situation. There was a there was a FSSP priest who sort of famously said, "Disobey your governor, disobey your bishop." And I believe that was on the issue of wearing masks in church. I can't remember what specifically that was about. But the obligation of obedience to your bishop is pretty high. And I'm of course not, if your bishop commands you to do something sinful, you're obviously required not to obey that. But that did not seem to be this particular FSSP priest did not seem to have the sort of the presumption of obedience that you normally should have with a bishop.
What was it?
I can't remember where. I mean, he was American. That's all I really know. But I remember the Twitter blew up all over trad Twitter, and it blew up on trad Twitter. People promoting what this priest was saying.
This is just one guy, to be fair. That's
Of course. I'm just saying that's one public example of the things you're referring to. I mean, it's also it's not like the FSSP is a huge group. I think they only have 400 priests, right?
Mm-hmm. I've actually known a couple of people at an ordinary parish. Nice parish overall, but they themselves actually brought me to not even an SSPX, but an SSPX renegade priest who did a couple of Latin masses out in the outskirts of my province. So I went to that once, and yeah, that's when I was more or less like a newbie to the whole trad thing. And yeah, it's at times you can see people who hide out in these non-Novus Ordo parishes who do have that attitude, unfortunately. But most people, at least in my experience, aren't like that. Most obey the bishop. Most have a proper respect. Most are not hyper online, unlike me. So I'd say that these are definitely exceptions to the rule, but they are there.
Yeah, no, and I mean, certainly, I'm not trying to impugn the whole FSSP. I mean, I'm not a regular Latin Mass attendee, but I do appreciate the Latin Mass, and all I'm saying is, I know of at least one public example of a figure like that. But one in like 400 or however many priests they have is not very much. And I have talked with other people who I know that go to FSSP parishes that have said their priests are very loyal and not disobedient. So I'm sorry, again, I'm not trying to say this is all of them, but this is all I'm saying is that, what Pope Francis is identifying is something that exists in at least some parishes.
Well,
I mean,
sorry.
Oh, sorry. What I would say as well is that there needs to be, this is something I found out the other day, there needs to be a recollection of actually how small the Latin Mass community is, at least in the US. In the UK, we have quite a few of them. But in America, there was a study that went over 38 states and they found 150,000 odd traditional Latin Mass going Catholics. And that's about a 70th of the American Catholic population. So they're very small. And if you look at if you look at the size, right, ideas are going to spread very quickly, particularly in the internet age. So I think that it's fair to say that a lot of these people are going to be at the very least aware of these schismatic tendencies. Whether or not they subscribe to them or not is another story. But it's quite a small, compact community. I think that this is sometimes forgotten by people who are involved with the Tridentine Mass, the sorts of people who see the boom in vocations, and then they come to the conclusion, I think somewhat fallaciously, that they're going to take over the church, right? So I think that needs to be acknowledged as well.
I did the math. Actually, the number would be closer to 1 out of 20 Catholics, because you have to remove the 70% of that population that
I did
believe in the real presence.
I did. So this is what I found, right? 70 million of the American population are Catholics. We can remove 80% that's not going to Mass, so that leaves 14 million. There are 150,000, right? So then you just do the maths. We're roughly 1 in 70. A little bit under that, actually.
That's awesome.
Nice. So one thing I have to just add in really quickly before maybe moving on to the next part of this. Hopefully, I know Pope Francis might not have intended on it, but as Alan said, one of the things that might come out of this is a backlash, and hopefully this might even renew interest in the Latin Mass. So maybe this is one thing that God uses to bring out an even greater good. We can only pray for that.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
As always.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no.
No, Al, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say Pope Francis comes from a generation that doesn't understand warfare. I mean, he comes from like I think he's born in the late 30s, so he kind of grew up in the aftermath of World War II, and they still have this vision of soldiers with guns and aircraft carriers, and this is how you fight war. That's not how you fight war anymore. So I think he's using the wrong approach here. It's got to be war. Like if you want to do war on the Latin Mass, you have to go about it in an intelligent way. And I think he has completely backfired. And I've talked to several people who now come to me and say, Al, you were right about this whole Motu proprio. I see it backfiring in my diocese. And again, I know no one who has lost their Latin Mass. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but I know no one who has lost it.
That's a really good point, because most of the places that have come out against it already really didn't allow it. Like Costa Rica, there was barely any TLM there, and they've gone way past banning the TLM. They don't allow, they're not allowing the use of Latin and Novus Ordo, which is contrary to canon law, definitely contrary to
Vatican II.
Missale Romanum.
Well, are you talking about Costa Rica or Puerto Rico?
I think they both did something very similar. I think Costa Rica's situation was worse.
Yeah, because there's a guy I'm friends with on Twitter and Discord who's a Catholic in Puerto Rico. He goes to Latin Mass there. He says there's this one diocese who just stamped down no Latin Mass is ever going to be said here ever, just firmly. But there was no Latin Mass there anyway. Now, I feel bad for the people in that diocese who want one because they're not going to get one, at least not under this bishop. But that's all I wanted to say.
Well, speaking of good things that could come out of this, other than generating an interest in the use of the 62 Missal, we've also got a mandate, which seems like empty words, unfortunately, from the pontiff, for a retrieval of how the 69 reforms were supposed to be, according to their actual texts. And I think me and some friends have been doing a lot of research on this over the last couple of weeks, and we're actually shocked about how continuous it could be with the 62 Missal. The use of communion verses, the propers from the last 1600 years all the way through, even if in the vernacular. Latin words of consecration are supposed to be normative. The prayer, of course, towards the altar is supposed to be normative and away from, or rather with the people. There are so many, that's a well-known aspect, but there are so many elements of the Missal and extra Missal liturgical texts like the Ordo Cantus Missae and the Graduale Romanum, which are essentially continuous with the 62 Missal and are not used at all, almost anywhere in the church. And I mean, the concrete situation we have is that the normative 69 Mass is not being used. And if it was, maybe there would be less of a scandal for so many people who just want to go to a Mass that isn't full of abuses. Because I think that's the real hazard here, is that so many people, if they do lose their TLM, they're just not going to have access to a Mass that doesn't have abuses in it. That's a major problem. But not only abuses, just like the actual identity of continuity with the Roman ritual going back centuries is severed in certain uses of the Novus Ordo because of the absurd amount of options that are present in it, and things like the epicletic canons and so on, which are foreign to the Roman tradition.
I think it might be worth talking about how serious liturgical abuse actually is as well, because like a lot of people haven't heard about it. Maybe it's worth maybe providing some like scriptural examples. Like I can't say if this is still in force, but I recall from the book of Leviticus that the sons of Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, are literally burnt to death for offering the wrong fire to God, right? So I can't say as to how that sits in terms of moral theology now, but God didn't consider it a good thing then. I can't say.
Well, I can give you the example of like when a priest receives communion out of a state of grace. This is a huge problem, and of course they have to receive communion during the Mass, right? And so the question is, when you have an epidemic of non-practice of the Liturgia Orarum, the canonical hours, which is a mandatory precept for clergy, what does that mean? What does that mean when barely any priests are offering the Liturgy of Hours, which is a legal necessity for them? It's mortal sinful for them not to.
I'm sorry. Do you have any? Do you have any evidence that most priests aren't praying the Liturgy of the Hours?
There is regional evidence for it. You can check some from Germany. We can look for some sources later, and I can show you.
Okay.
But there's regional evidence from lots of different places, and you can just anecdotally talk to priests, and you'll see barely any of them pray the whole thing.
Okay, I mean, it's nothing I've ever asked a priest about personally.
Mhm. I mean, well,
But
I know
so
a lot
I
of
just
seminarians, and they tell me that their teachers don't pray it.
Wow.
That's sad as well. It's not even that long.
Yeah, especially the current form. I mean, so alongside that, I think one of the biggest things, and let's just put things in perspective, the biggest problem isn't quite only abuses in the liturgy. It's the thing which would serve as a reason for people to put a stop to it. That would be, first of all, Canon 214 says that we have a right to be able to worship according to the precepts of our liturgical rite. And that's for everyone, the whole people of God, not just, it's not just something for priests to talk about or to write, or like lay theologians to write articles about. This is for everyone. This is a right that we all have. It's for the law to be followed. And then secondly, we have the problem of a lack of grace being received when people receive communion, and rather they're ministering damnation to themselves because they don't know that they are supposed to be morally certain of being in a state of grace when they receive. So one of the major reasons for this is, if you just quickly go through the lack of sort of liturgical pedagogy of this in the new use, normatively, is that the only place where this is mandatory to be mentioned in the new use of the Eucharistic liturgy of the Latin Church is in the secret prayers by the priest, which is said on Corpus Christi. Then this is the same in the TLM. They're both in the secret prayers, but the TLM also has 1 Corinthians 11, a passage including verses 27 to 29 in the lection, which is not present in the Novus Ordo lection. This would be solved if, for example, the communion antiphon, which is the same section, it's a passage which includes that same section from the TLM, was in the 69 Reform lectionary, but it's not. It goes just before verse 27, which is where the warning against unworthy reception starts, and then it ends. The other place where you would find it, in a place where the congregation would hear it, other than the homily where it should be and isn't on Corpus Christi, is in the sequence, which is St. Thomas's hymn Lauda Sion, which is all about the Eucharist, of course. And in the TLM, it's the same sequence, same canticle, but it must be prayed all the way through. In the new use, you can either do a shortened version of it, truncated so that it stops just before the warning, or you can do the long version, which almost no one ever sees, or you can replace it with a so-called equivalent hymn, which is usually something totally unrelated. So most parish churches that are using the new use, most of the congregants will never hear the warning against unworthy reception in the liturgy, ever. Now, this may seem like just one point of the relationship between lex credendi, lex orandi, and lex vivendi, but it's not just one point. The pinnacle of Christian life in the wayfaring state is the reception of the Eucharist. And when the majority of our people don't know how they're supposed to do that properly, why do you think things are so bad today?
Another thing to add on top of that as well.
I'm sorry. So is that verse never quoted in the mass readings?
It's not just the verse, but the concept of unworthy reception. It's not in the mass readings in the new use, but it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be in one of the propers called the sequence. It's in Thomas's hymn Lauda Sion, where the concept is mentioned.
That's interesting. I mean, I know. I feel like regionally there's probably a lot of differences in how people experience the Novus Ordo Mass. Because I remember you mentioned on Twitter once that that almost all of the Novus Ordo Masses in your area have altar girls or something like that. Extraordinary ministers is what you said.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never witnessed any. I haven't been to tons of Western churches or Eastern churches, for that matter. But of the like half a dozen or so I've been to, I've never seen a single extraordinary minister of any type. So yeah,
Wow.
I feel like these things may vary a lot from diocese to diocese or country to country.
You're very lucky. That's not normative.
That's
Okay,
normal in
That
the
is
UK.
not
from what I've seen.
normative.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. Yeah. But I mean, also, I mean, in my personal experience, I have heard many priests say have many homilies on, to be fair, not specifically on worthiness to receive communion, but on the importance of confession, which I think that's at least kind of close. So I don't know. It's hard really to get a handle of how common this stuff is.
You've got a fair point that it's regionalized, and obviously it varies from specific parish to specific parish. But on the whole, there has been a huge drop in the use of private confession by most congregants, and this is noted in papal magisterium. You can look at ad limina visits by bishops and audiences given by popes to them, where they'll complain about this repeatedly for most of the pontificates since the last ecumenical council, including Paul VI. Well, they'll complain, why are you giving general absolution outside of emergencies and not telling people to come to private confession? What are you doing? You'll see this stuff a lot. There was I couldn't fish it out for you right now, but there's a specific US bishop at limina visit where Paul VI basically is just ends up berating them. It's crazy how much there is that people don't know about that is on that Vatican.va website.
Secret trad Paul VI confirmed.
In the 69 Missale Romanum Apostolic Constitution, which is probably going to come up again later in this conversation, but in that document, he pretty much says that the words of consecration should be said in Latin universally, that every single Eucharistic prayer should have the same words pronounced universally, as, basically a principle of unity in the entire Latin communion, despite the enculturation was to follow in other areas of the liturgy. That wasn't followed. I know it's barely done here.
Well, I mean, I'm sorry, you said it basically says that. So, I mean, what does that mean? Does it actually say that, or does it imply that?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I can grab it for you now and just read the relevant line.
Okay.
I've seen it done in Latin, I think, once.
Yeah. I think I've seen it once as well. But what it says is, however, for pastoral reasons and in order to facilitate concelebration, we've ordered that the words of the Lord ought to be identical in each formulary of the canon. Thus, in each Eucharistic prayer, we wish the words be pronounced thus over the bread: Accipite et maducate ex hoc omnes, so on. The words mysterium fidei, taken from the context of the words of Christ the Lord, said by the priest, serves an introduction to the acclamation of the faithful. So it's pretty clear that it's supposed to be pronounced thus, right? Pronounced in the same way in each Eucharistic prayer. And I mean, the topic of this particular paragraph is talking about unity and diversity throughout the Latin Church after the Reform. So,
how does this translate with subsequent updates to the Missale Romanum?
You would have to go through the documents from JP2, which I haven't done yet.
Yeah, you see, that's what I'm thinking. Maybe there was a change later on, and that's why.
Yeah, it could be in this particular point. I don't think that there were things that were that rigorous in changes. Though most of JP2's texts were like clarifications and further developments on proper implementation, rather than sort of recanting previous aspects of the Reform.
Yeah, I just think that now we've mentioned like liturgical abuse as a serious thing. I think that there needs to be a sort of a guard against scrupulosity, because I know that I can get I got very scrupulous about this, and I still kind of do. So maybe like an addressing of that, if other people are interested.
Right. So one thing that I would say is, for any issue that you might have, consult your bishop. I know that it might not be available for everyone, but if you can, do try to reach out, call his office, send him an email, reach out and try to communicate what you can, and don't try to communicated as you have to do what I say. This is really important. Your priest is acting. Just communicate it as a personal concern and ask for an answer, and ask if the bishop could say anything to give you any relief or some sort of satisfaction. I think if you take these precautions, then you're at the very least building a sort of relationship with your bishop, and you're enabling him to at least see what you can understand as a big issue. That's the first thing. Always remember the final authority is in the bishop of the diocese, not yourself. That relieves a lot of stress off you.
Whoa, when did this come out? No, I'm just kidding.
the second
Arch modernist Saint Ignatius of Antioch.
The second thing to keep in mind is like even a lot of things I really don't want, like altar girls or extraordinary ministers. Just remember, in the early church, we actually had women who were deacons, not in the sense of deacons as we understand it. The deaconesses just did things like assist with the baptism of other women. They had their own sort of office. It was related to the church, but it was something allowed by them. And over time, we've just basically abolished the office. Now, I'm not saying that female altar servers are a good thing, nor are extraordinary ministers, but even in the history of the church, we have had positions where the office was problematic. It ended up being abolished. It doesn't mean that beforehand it was hunky-dory, but it just meant that we have dealt with this sort of thing before, and it doesn't totally take away from the validity or the legality of the Mass itself.
Right.
And a few other things to keep in mind. One, in terms of practices that are allowed today, like communion on the hand, that is something which the bishops do have the power to. Not the bishops, the Pope himself has the power to allow, and it's something that's allowed. It's not something that should be the norm, but it is something that is allowed. You don't feel odd about doing so if you're forced to. In fact, we have the Chalcedonian, not the Chalcedonian. In fact, the church in Iraq did it quite frequently. Not only that, but it was an ancient practice in the church. So again, it's not a big deal. You don't have to do things like lick your hand to get rid of every single particle. That's definitely not something that's required or requested of you. And the idea that it's sacrilegious is just superstitious. It's not something that should be around, mind you, because it's led to a lot of abuses. But it isn't something that you are sinful for taking part in or doing. So just remember that as well. And again, the last thing you need to do is listen to a blog by Trad Knight 57. You should most likely talk to your priest and then bishop. That's the first thing, not the internet people.
Yeah. Another thing I would add as well is that there may be occasions where you're mistaking regional practice for being actually essential to the rubric. So it might be worth consulting, and I might get corrected here, the general instruction of the Roman Missal. That might be worth inspecting, because sometimes there'll be regional practices which are praiseworthy, that are introduced into the Mass, and sometimes a priest might omit them, and you might be like, well, where's that gone? And it's like, oh, it's just a regional practice. The second thing is that somebody has asked me what exactly the problem with altar girls is, if you could, John, because just for their sake, if you could explain what the issue is with it.
So one of the biggest issues I have with the altar girls is if you read the Old Testament and who was there to help in the temple, it was the Levites. It was an all male group. The priests, when you look at the offices in the New Testament, it was also all males, from the minor clergy and the minor offices to the major clergy. The reason why altar servers are men, or should be men, is because it's supposed to be a build-up to the major orders, ideally. And the understanding is, at least since the Old Testament, that it would be men who did the altar work, not women. So it's to keep in line with tradition, and it's to keep in line with the continuity of the Old to New Testament. I'm not saying that there's anything about altar girls that is invalidating or illicit. but it is just not what I would consider to be the most fitting use of the office of the altar server. It should be male, in keeping with the tradition and in keeping with the altar practices of the Old to New Testaments.
Yeah, that person is asking me has the church definitively ruled on this particular thing at any point, or is this current practice?
It's mostly out of custom. There's never been a pope, to my knowledge, who's come out and said, if you institute if anyone shall institute the altar girls to serve, let him be anathema. I've not ever come across something like that, but I think that the best case is for an all-male set of altar servers. It's probably the most fitting, and at least by my lights, considering my understanding of scripture and tradition. So I am definitely going to side with that.
We really gotta.
Oh, sorry.
There's a big. Sorry, Al.
Oh, you want me to go? In terms of popes criticizing altar girls, I don't have the quotes on me right now, but they're like I can think of at least 3 or 4 offhand because I researched this a while back. Like there's firm condemnation of altar girls in the time between Trent and the 1983 Code of Canon Law, where they're permitted. Now, the thing that makes me skeptical about altar girls is that it started as an act of disobedience. Like there was no altar girls, and it started in Germany, surprisingly, that incredibly evil country.
Say no more.
Yeah, and it starts as an act of disobedience, and then it continues in the 70s, and then in the 1983 Code of Canon Law, Pope John Paul II just throws in the towel. He's like, well, they're doing it already, and it'd be really hard to stop, so I might as well just let them do it. And yeah, but no, it was certainly condemned very forcefully in the time between in the time between Trent and Vatican II. So I just thought I'd.
So just wanted to jump in on 2 or 3 things so far. So when people ask about, has there been a definitive teaching on this? I want to remind people that definitive teachings are extraordinary. They're not the normative, ordinary practice of the church. And most of the time, we operate not on the particular protection of particular acts from error, but we operate on the general protection of fallible magisterial acts in general by the whole church, together with the Pope and the bishops in their state of dispersion, or the papacy himself teaching authentically, fallibly though. And it's the consistency of the teaching which makes it infallible, not the particular acts, but there's a general protection of teaching, which means that consistent teachings are dogmatic, which is why there are many things that we understand as recently reaffirmed by the magisterium as always having been dogmatic, but which were never solemnly defined, such as, for example, John Paul II, his letter Ordinatio Sacerdotales, where he says that women cannot be elevated to the priesthood. It's impossible. And the reason that this is a reaffirmation is because it belongs to what we call the secondary object of ecclesial infallibility. It's not, he wasn't defining about female priesthood in particular. He was defining the historical fact that this has been consistently taught and is a protected teaching. And so this is why it's a reaffirmation and confirmation of the teaching as opposed to a soft definition on the matter. So like we have to keep in mind here that just because something hasn't been infallibly defined, we can't move towards this strange hermeneutic where is it not infallibly defined in some particular act like we read somewhere? No, that's not how
Your mic kind of went a bit. Could you?
Yeah, it sounds like you're underwater.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
It's better
Am I
now.
not audible?
No,
Just
it's
those last
fine
two sentences, really.
It's good now.
Okay, so basically, we have to keep in mind that the church doesn't operate in this way where we can just go, oh, well, there wasn't a particular infallible act protected from error. Oh, then I don't need to listen. It doesn't matter, because if something is consistently taught in many fallible acts, then the consistency itself marks the doctrine as infallible, not any particular act, right? So that's an important thing to keep in mind. That's how the ordinary and universal magisterium, which is infallible, works. Another thing I wanted to mention is, if we had a robust catechesis in the church and a liturgical formation in the church, which made it clear what the distinctive sacramentality of the woman and the man are in contradistinction to one another, it would be very clear why women can't become presbyters, and it would be very clear why they shouldn't be other things that they can be but shouldn't be, like altar servers or lectors, why they shouldn't be receiving pedalavium, which is the episcopal foot washing ritual that happens during Holy Week, why these things shouldn't happen. The reason why these things shouldn't happen comes down, like I said, to this different sacramentality of the body and soul of the woman as opposed to the body and soul of the man. And there's so much patristic literature on this, and there's so much development in the scholastic theologians, and even some recent contemporary theologians like St. Teresa Benedicta of the Cross or St. Edith Stein. There's lots of teaching on this and lots of elucidation on it, but there is a total lack of it in teaching and consciousness, which leads people to fall to a sort of what we call ecclesial positivity, where they're just like, well, the reason women can't become priests is because it says so, or because, Christ is a man, not a woman. But then the question is, okay, then why don't priests all have to be Jews? It's not good enough to just say, well, he was a man, so therefore priests have to be men. Well, the question has to be asked, well, what's the significance of being a man? Why did he have to be a man and not a woman? What does it mean for him to be the new Adam and not the new Eve? What do these things mean? What does it mean to be a man and not a woman? What does it mean to be a woman and not a man in terms of the order of creation and the order of grace? What do these things mean? And I don't want to get into all that because that's a whole topic of its own. But if these things were understood, we wouldn't need to ask these questions like, well, why shouldn't women be altar servers? Why shouldn't women be able to be lectors and speak in a liturgical function? Why is it that, and this may shock you, Vatican II's document Musicam Sacram says that if women sing during Mass, they're not allowed inside the presbytery. They have to be separated from the rest of the choir. Why? Why are these things in there? Why are there these liturgical distinctions between men and women? We would understand all of this if we understood why women can't be priests.
Well said.
Amen.
Yeah, and I mean, just definitely on one of the things you said earlier, about that there's a lot more than just extraordinarily defined dogmas that we need to follow. This is something I see a lot in especially trad circles, where they'll say stuff like, "Haha, I affirm all the anathemas of Vatican II," Blessed Pius IX said in the Syllabus of Errors, he condemned the proposition, the obligation by which Catholic teachers and authors are strictly bound is confined to those things only which are proposed to universal belief as dogmas of the faith by the infallible judgment of the Church. This is a condemned proposition by one of the trans favorite popes. But this is definitely a very common mentality in trad circles. I mean, even recently, to be fair to this man, I have not personally heard him say this, but I know on Reason and Theology, Michael Lofton claimed that Father Altman said publicly, if it's not a dogma, I don't follow it. Now, and like I said, I have not personally seen this clip of Father Altman saying this, so it could be, could be false. I can't confirm it myself. Just, I don't think Michael Lofton's the type of guy to make that up, though. So it's really disturbing that this is something that appears to even come from priests sometimes. The idea that you can just ignore anything that isn't an extraordinarily defined dogma.
Stop blackpilling me, man. This is too much. Oh, the catechesis is so poor.
Yeah.
What is happening?
I mean, honestly, when I was being converted to Catholicism, that was more or less the impression I had, that dogmas are all you need to follow.
Convert a cat instead of convert a dox.
Yeah. Yeah. No. But no, I mean, yes, that. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I ever explicitly formulated it in that way in my brain, but I mean that was definitely the impression that I got for a while. But yeah, so I don't know. Does anyone have anything else to say?
Actually, that's something that I wanted to talk about a little bit. I was thinking about subsequent actions, and I think it was either or both Father Ripperger and Bishop Barron recommended that there be some sort of pass given to people using social media to communicate Catholic messages. And I think that if this were to be done, that this would avoid a whole load of problems that people are facing, along with catechesis, because you wouldn't have, people who are like teaching half of the faith, or they're not like vetted properly. And I think that would be something I think that'd be a good thing. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I remember.
I kind of like the idea of needing a papal dispensation to have a Twitter account. That's actually kind of genius.
I remember reading an article on First Things about this, and their argument wasn't even that to talk about Catholicism publicly you would need approval from your bishop, but just that some sort of like gold check mark. Where you could get approval from your bishop, and that that would be a sign that you have officially sanctioned authority to talk about this stuff online.
Kind of like an imprimatur.
Yeah. But because I mean, it seems like in the modern day it would be very difficult, to enforce anything like this, with how many people there are on, with how the internet is.
The chaos of the masses, the sea of unfettered public opinion, sewage flowing through every pipe. It's too much.
John Fisher, would you like to shill anything before you leave?
Yeah, check out my channel at Original One Productions and follow me on Twitter. My name is John Fisher, number 2, spelled .dot, and then the number 0. It was nice being on here, and I wish I could stay longer, but I just have to head out.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for joining us.
Later, John.
See you later, John.
I guess I'm the only one here who's actually got the video going. Oh.
That's good.
Yeah, nice try, Fed.
I live with family and didn't want any awkward moments.
Well, I really wish that it could be possible for them to give you the gold check, papal dispensation for every Twitter account, because,
I mean, this guy with the Greek name here makes a really strong point. Settlers lament, and the people he invites on should be the only people allowed to talk about Catholicism online. I mean, that's he makes a strong argument.
I'm not a canon lawyer. I don't know crap. Sorry, go
ahead. Sorry, Elliot. Was there was there more yet to say?
Sorry, I was just saying language because, I suppose it's not considered a swear word in America, but in Britain we consider that a swear word. Yeah,
that is actually a genuine example of culture shock.
Yeah.
Which word was that?
Please don't. Yeah, poop. Okay.
But no, I mean,
it's cultural differences. Don't be so anti-American.
No, I'm doing something else. No, I'm doing something else. So you can just ignore me, okay?
But I just want to finish the point of just the white noise the tsunami, the madness of modern liberal, just the of liberalism, where it's just everybody has for some reason has a right to their own opinion, and everybody's going to mention their own opinion. I know that democracy is cosmetic in like our countries that we have, and it's not really like that, but it's kind of like the front end of the business of government. It's just, it pervades everything, and everybody's just running their mouth about everything, and it's all white noise, and it just leads to madness. So I mean, obviously you have to filter it out, and you just have to.
On that note, there was a guy who said, Concerned Catholic says in the chat, he said, shouldn't just clergy speak, right? And I just want to say, like, no, that's completely wrong. And it wasn't that way in the early church. It hasn't been that way for a very long time. There is a big error with a way of thinking where receiving holy orders means that you're able to speak, and if you don't, then there aren't any particular sort of elucidations on a wider range of the state of life for Catholics that you can provide. Like in the early church, you would have the presbyter acting as Eucharistic presider. Of course, then, for example, in Romans, you find that there are churches recognized as churches.
Your mic's gone underwater again, Hassan.
Not again. Okay.
There we go. Better. Much better.
So basically, in the early church, and you can see this in scripture in Rome, in the letter to the Romans, right? You find that people are going to basically people's houses and being led by lay leaders in the early equivalent of the Liturgy of Hours, which at the time would have just been synagogue worship, essentially, the psalm worship, and reading scripture together and discussing and so on and so forth, sharing their meditations on the word, so on and so forth. And then the Eucharistic feast would be had under the bishop. So, I mean, in this idea that there is no sort of like consultative role for the laity, a sort of synodality, where the lay people have a real role and are supposed to come of age and really act and really speak, is not true. It's incredibly wrong. And the idea that if we move towards a time when only clerics can speak, things will be much better. Just look at the time of St. Peter Damian and try saying that. Just read into our history and see how things have actually been in our past. It's not that way at all. There is no, and I want to say this now, there is no golden age in our past which you can point to and say, if only things were like that now. There is no period like that. We have to keep moving forward and applying what we've learned from our history and from the theologians in concrete reality, which has never been fully done.
Yeah, I think that a lot of I've read it said, at least, that a lot of trad Caths are trying to seek out this pre-1960 or pre-1960s past that just doesn't exist. Like you read, for example, in Father Reginald Garrigou Lagrange's book from 1938, The Three Ages of the Interior Life, him lamenting this practical naturalism. He describes at one point when he's talking about Thanksgiving for the Eucharist as a very profitable spiritual practice. All of you, after receiving the Eucharist, should be kneeling and meditating and giving thanks for at least like a decent amount of time after you've received and after the Mass. This is a profoundly important spiritual practice that I wasn't aware of until I read his book. He mentions about a layman that was that said to a priest, and this was in like the 1930s, right? So this is way before then. Is it weird that I keep reflecting on my reception of the Eucharist? And the priest responds, well, it's a meal just like any other. Why would you meditate on it like that? And he goes like, this is the spirit of practical naturalism, which is utterly going to destroy like valid, I think he even goes as far as to say like actually valid receptions of the Eucharist, right? This spirit was there for many years beforehand, and it was there at different points in history in different ways. Like, do you think that the Protestant, like for those who are like of this trad mentality, do you think that the Protestant Reformation came from nowhere? there was this attitude that was anti-deuterocanon, at least so far as I understand, in some people that was even back then. This kind of Jeromism that was present with some of the humanists, I think. Although, I don't know, right? This is something that I sort of heard.
That's a whole nother discussion. I mean,
Yeah,
it's much more.
it is. But my emphasis is, right, you're going to have crazy stuff at any point in history. And this is one of those times, right? We have good things now, we have bad things now. There were good things before Trent, there were bad things, right? Like everything, right? Just try not to pursue this time that never existed.
Well, speaking of things that never existed, I know there's something that from Hassan and Elliot, there's something that I know, kind of a bit of a difficulty, I guess, in my mind. That in the chat here, I saw you said, Elliot, the Novus Ordo is good.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. No. I agree. I love the Mass of St. Paul VI. I've been to the Mass of St. Paul VI more than I have any other Mass, and I enjoy it quite a bit. But what it seems to me that you guys are saying is that the Roman Missal is good, and there's nothing wrong with the Roman Missal. It's perfect, great, epic. But the issue is that it isn't actually being followed. But doesn't it seem to damage the church's indefectibility if all you're saying is that we have a perfect missal that is never actually being followed? We have a perfect mass in theory, but a terrible mass in practice?
You're literally just copying a question off of one of Michael Lofton's streams.
This is what people say about communism too. It's like, oh, communism is good. It's like, how about the Soviet Union? How about China? How about North Korea? It's like, well, it's never been implemented right. So like I thought of that analogy immediately.
I mean, that's a really stupid argument, because you could go to Burkina Faso and point to Thomas Sankara and say, well, he was really successful.
I mean, even if we go through our history, if you look at the first councils, things were not done the way that we would have done them if we weren't impressed upon by imperial protocol, right? There are lots of things that we did and we might have done differently without state pressure. We might have done differently without pressure from residual pagan values in the cultures that we were attempting to bring into and fully incarnate the gospel in their social ties and in their lives. We've had lots of these problems over the century since we began. It is the case that we have been steadily implementing our faith in society and in our personal lives and in family lives, but there's always been things that we can improve upon, and always things where we've recognized that we've failed to emphasize particular things in practice or in writing. And as we come to today, when we look at the way that the current missal works, no, I don't think that the missal is just fine rubrically in and of itself. I really don't. I don't think the GIRM is fantastic. I think there are big problems with how many options are permitted, where you have the stereotypically, we call it the option 1, which is the one in continuity with the 62 missal. And then you have all these other options in many places. You have the options for the canon, with option 1 being the Roman canon, some of them being completely contrived, like EP2, which for some reason, because it's the one with the greatest brevity, it's used the most often. You have the problem where you can replace the propers with a so-called equivalent hymn, which results in atrocity all over the place. There are lots of problems. There are lots of problems with the actual letter of the Roman Missal. It's not the case that it's all well and good in itself, and there's nothing that should be altered there in order to bring it in line with continuity with the previous use of the Roman rite. There are lots of things that need to be done. It's not simply a matter of implementation, although that is part of it for sure.
Something apropos to this, right? I'm aware of what is said for theologians in Donum Veritatis about criticizing prudential decisions of the church and criticizing, things like this, right? But is there any other information about how far we're allowed to go with regards to like legitimate criticism and things like this beyond Donum Veritatis?
It completely depends on your view. Like, you can hold to the more voluntarist Jesuit view, which is basically literally do exactly the letter of what you're told and don't really question anything unless you have a qualification. But then you have the older tradition of people like St. Thomas and so on, which is much more, you should really think about these things and make sure a law is good before you commit yourself to it. And I'm much more partial to this older view and to the Salamancan view than to this other strange ultramontane notion that comes about much later.
Okay. I was just wondering if there was another magisterial line you could draw beyond Donum Veritatis, and it doesn't seem that way.
Donum Veritatis is very good. I don't think anybody should complain about that document.
Well, I'm saying that applies to theologians, and I'm not clear if that means that I don't think I'm not sure whether we would qualify for that. That's what I'm saying.
Right. It applies at a very low level to normal people who are just trying to learn things. But I mean, we're getting to a point where it's kind of ridiculous. Like, you can sit there for 6 months as a layperson and read, and then find yourself looking at doctoral level stuff and thinking, why is this at doctoral level? If we were learning this stuff from the age of 3 to the age of 18, we would be past this by now, surely. It's just strange. I've come from the background that I've come from. You guys know me, and it's there's just, in the religiously educated part of my culture, people know much more than the general masculine people.
Underwater again.
Not again.
There we go. It's when you say not again that it fixes itself.
Yes,
you've come up for a breath now, so it's good.
I think that might actually be it. There's something going on with this, but yeah. So when in our culture, when people are religiously educated by culture, right? They're from that subculture. They have much more knowledge than the average mass goer in the Catholic Church. It's just the moral knowledge and so on and so forth is much better. And when you meet people who know a lot comparatively to other lay people in Catholicism, they usually reverts or converts, and it's just not comparable, really. Usually they're reverts or converts, and it's just not comparable to somebody who's really been learning this stuff and had a good catechesis from the age of 4 or 5. This weird catechetical dream that you see in papal documents like Familiaris Consortio and so on and so forth that doesn't really manifest anywhere. So it's very jarring.
In fairness, I think. Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, because look, I'm from Canada. I mean, I think everyone here is from either Canada, the States, or England. And now I should point out that these are not majority Catholic countries. Do you think places like South America, Poland, Hungary, and places where the Catholic Church has a lot more power, that things are a lot better? I got the impression that they are. But in Canada, there's no control over the education system.
Well, Competing the Soul and I have got a lot of friends from places like this, and I know a lot of people from Portugal, Poland, Croatia, and even then, a lot of them have what we can call a sort of cultural religiosity, where they are genuinely devoted, but they make lots of assumptions and they take a lot of things for granted, especially in moral life, as permissible. So, for example, a friend of mine, he recently he broke up with his Italian girlfriend. And they butt heads a lot. He's a Norwegian, and he's a convert, and he knows quite a bit about the moral tradition. He's read quite a bit, and he understands, especially things to do with sexual ethics. And this girl, who is sees herself as part of her country's sort of conservative strand of the religion, couldn't deal with a lot of his matters of conscience, don't want to make a lot of physical contact. Definitely no physical acts of sexual expression, and so on and so forth, which is, the consensus until the 1920s for 1,600 years at least. Why does that change? I don't know. But again, this is something where you find that most people who grow up in these cultures have got lots of assumptions where it's well, X thing is part of our culture, and we are the religious conservatives in our culture, so therefore it must be okay because our community and the people I know do it. So how can it not be okay? I've never heard a priest talk about this.
Well, Hassan, frankly, we do know why it's become like that, but I mean, I'm just wondering, I don't understand how someone can break away from a person they've never joined to.
I don't know what you mean. Like, I don't think we do know. I think this is still something that, like, even like, you know, professional historical theologians are still trying to figure out how we divorced ourselves from the long-term consensus on sexual ethics and many other matters in moral theology. It's really confusing. There's actually not much work being done on this. It's not as simple as like a basic anthropological change or the Enlightenment or something like that. It's much more complex.
Another thing I would note as well is that I obviously can't speak exactly to what happened 500 years ago, but you go online and you find the scans of have any of you heard of the great commentary of Cornelius a Lapide?
Yep.
Yeah,
I've
like,
got some of it over there.
Yeah, like you look at that, and like you look at the pages in Latin and the amount of citations, it's astonishing. I wish I could read most of it. Right? It shows you that there was this scholastic tradition there at one point, so there's no reason why we can't have it.
So basically, if Ryan Grant is watching, he knows what to translate next. So.
Okay.
Please, if he is watching, please, Melchior Cano. We need method. We have no method.
I tell you, part of the reason why I'm learning Latin is just so I can read that commentary, because it's huge, and I can see, from what little Latin I have, I can see all these citations of the different scholastic fathers. And would they have been at the manualists at that point? I'm not sure, but this was in the beginning of the 17th century.
Yeah, they would have been around.
Yeah, it was just after Trent, right? And you see this, I remember learning from it certain parts of the various ecumenical councils. I had no idea that I was falling into error over just on the basis of having that there. And it's I would have never found it out otherwise, right? You have this profound lack of scriptural commentaries from Catholics just because they're not translated. You have Haydock, which is all right. You have a lot of New Testament not patriarchal, patristic commentary, right? When it comes to the Old Testament, almost nothing. You've got the prologues written by Saint Jerome. You have odd things from Chrysostom and Cyril of Alexandria. No, not Cyril. Cyril of Alexandria, right? But then you've got these huge, you've got the whole Patrologiae. I almost did a master's thesis on translating these. I'm in contact with people who work with these things, right? You have 125 volumes or 150 volumes of untranslated Latin, and then you've got 120 volumes of untranslated Greek, and then you've got a still being built, 35 something like that volumes of things in the Oriental languages, mostly things like Syriac. I would be surprised if there isn't some Ethiopic in there, right? You have all of this stuff there, and it can't be read because no one knows the languages.
Yeah.
On the previous point that Hassan was making, I'm sorry to backtrack.
Sorry, quick interruption. I just want everyone to think about how we could have a society that has factories full of people translating things from Latin into English, but instead we have only
this scratches if we could put all.
What if we just have more vocations and then have apostolates, or maybe not even lay apostolates, but
more monks?
Religious. Yes,
I remember
more monks.
industrial complex. Latin industrial complex.
I remember one of the things that I felt like I was going to do if I ever became a tech millionaire, right? I would say to the various religious orders, right, I will fund your seminaries, but you have to teach your students the classical languages so they can work their way through the Patrologiae and actually translate them.
Well, if you guys read anything from Cistercian publications,
yeah,
they translate a lot.
Great.
They translate a lot of. Now it's all Latin stuff. I don't think they do any Greek, but there's a lot of medieval, probably from the 7th through 13th century they cover, and yeah, like they do a lot. It's only Latin, but they're translating a lot of new stuff. Like I've got tons of books by them about like good medieval stuff that's not like if you guys read William of Saint Thierry and Ayland of Rivo.
Oh yeah.
Venerable,
I was actually
a lot of
actually, if I could make a recommendation, my priest friend lent me a copy of the Spiritual Friendship by Saint Aelred of Rievaulx. It's something that people should definitely read. Like every single one of you here should read that. It's basically a Christianization of Cicero's dialogue on friendship, and I think that it would really help people to read it. It's only 120 pages, and it's sublime. I loved it.
I can't find my copy here. I'm just gonna find it.
Sorry, we can't hear you.
Oh.
He's looking for his copy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was trying to find my copy so I could help you out, so everyone can just go and order it. But I think. Wait a minute.
They've got a really good, I would say another like basically must read is their volume on the history of Lectio Divina, and also different treatises on it from the tradition. Because nowadays, if you want to find stuff on Lectio, most of it's contemporary people trying to explain it to you, and it's just not very good. It's okay. It's okay. It's not as good as the Cistercian publications. But
I mean, there's so many wonderful medieval works. Like we all know what the Summa Theologiae is and the Summa Contra Gentiles, but one of the most wonderful things I've read, I think, and I never finished it. I really like at some point. Like it's got some really good stuff, right? Saint Bonaventure's Life of Christ, right? I started meditating my way through it, and there's this one bit where Bonaventure is talking about the circumcision of Christ, and he points out this is almost like a kind of a prefigurement of the Passion, because he's shedding his blood even as a baby for the sake of mankind to go under the law. You know, you see like wonderful stuff like this.
Okay.
Where can you get a copy of that translated?
You can get it through it's on like there's these collections for Kindle that are like, you know, complete works of a particular saint, and it was in one of those. The trouble is that it has a lot of archaic vocabulary. Like I thought it was originally like an OCR error, but it has the word compassionate, and it's like he compassionate them, and it turns out that was actually an archaic word for pity, which I had no idea about, but it doesn't really correct these things.
it's Life of Christ is sold very cheap by a translation by Eterna Press, Aeterna.
Oh,
that's a good one.
Yeah, I've got a few of their books. I've got the letters of Bernard of Clairvaux from them.
Oh, I got the Bernard of Clairvaux collection. I used to read one of the homilies on the Canticle of Canticles a week, and it's fantastic. That was a recommendation from Elliot, actually. Give me a second.
Yeah, someone's mentioned about me re-uploading a video off of an old channel about how to pray. I think he means Lectio Divina. Yeah, I should probably do that at some point. I'll note it down in a document. You
also should probably not make a new channel every 6 months.
That's not going to happen.
Whoops.
We got a super chat from Jedi Knight Anathan Cringewalker for $5. Wish they translated the Aramaic too. What little I've learnt is beautifully rich poetry. Yo, dude, you're a Lutheran. Don't pretend you get to care about Christian tradition prior to 1517. But no, yes, I agree, Cringewalker. Also submit to the Pope.
Someone says in the chat about the vilification of Latin and the sidelining of the Latin translation by Jerome. I want to point out that Trent is very clear, and this is grounded in our ecclesiology, that the Vulgate is free from substantial error because the Prime See approved its use for theology, liturgy, and prayer. And this is super important because what does it mean for the Prime Church to do such a thing? then it means that because it's been routinely done many times, small errors have been removed by, for example, the Sixta Clementine revision and things like that, that were not insubstantial matters, and so on and so forth. And there's these consistent promulgations, consistent approbations of this text. It can't lead you into doctrinal error. So the Vulgate is the very best source for both the New and the Old Testament, but we exposit it using the original languages, which is what the text says. And I've got Alphonsus Liguori's commentary on Trent here, where he says very much this. And by the way, if anybody's interested in Trent, that's pretty much like a must read, I've got to tell you, because there's so many things in there that place us into commonality with a lot of the Protestant traditions in ways that I didn't know. And there's a lot of sort of clarifications on doctrines there where you hear people say all sorts of things about what Trent says, but without the context of what's in the Acta Synodalia for the council, you don't actually know what the propositions are saying in context, or what the debates were, what the big characters were, like Contarini, Seripando, and so on and so forth. You just won't know what was going on there and why different agreements were made, redactions of the text before it was promulgated, stuff like that. It's really important if you really want to understand Trent. I don't know why more people don't look into these older commentaries on the text that are, steeped in the history of the period. But definitely Alphonsus's commentary is really, really good, and people should pick that up. He wrote it when he was 85 years old.
Looks like Cringe Walker is, doing another super chat. He's funding the channel. Are you sure this is a Catholic channel when you receive so much funding from outer groups? I guess he's not.
Most of Luther is untranslated. Think of the hate speech I'll learn when they do.
I don't think that's true.
Most of Augustine isn't even translated, though.
I mean, who cares whether or not he's translated or not? Luther is just some guy. I mean...
Oh, come on.
I don't...
Come on, man. Like, no. That he has interesting things. Like, there's a recent book by a Catholic scholar on Mormon, Moorman, who shows that, like, if we don't really take seriously what his grievances were, we won't understand what indulgences are. We won't understand.
Well, no, I mean, okay, sorry, I'm being all hyperbolic and loquacious here, but of course his critiques where it's like, oh, I have a problem with this, I have a problem with that. But in terms of like him creating his own theology and the whole church, like, what's happening here?
It all comes from a fundamental ecclesiological error, but like these people, like their commentaries on scripture and their doctrines and so on, they're not useless. They're still really good for people to come to understand,
Well, let me just say something about Martin Luther. My entire dad's family is Lutheran, including my dad. He's lapsed, but and I probably read more Luther than 99% of the people I know, 99.9%, including Lutheran pastors. I've read a lot of Luther, and I'll say he's a good writer. He's very witty. Like the Protestants were lucky their founder was a guy who knew how to be that, like, rhetorically trained. Like, he was a very good writer. I wish I could write like that, of course, for the true faith. So
he was a lawyer, right?
He was originally going to be a lawyer.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, he was a friar when he, before the schism.
I mean, I've also heard his table talks.
I think he went through with training to be a lawyer, and I think he was like one semester away from completing or something, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, and then because of his personal moral problems, which I think he repented for, he ended up having to leave the school.
Did he get literally struck by lightning or something at some point?
No, he got caught in a lightning storm.
Oh.
And he got scared. So.
Right.
That was why.
The feel when no Saint Luther who founded the Order of Lutherans.
Sad.
speaking of weird, of Protestantism, I mean, Luther seems kind of normal compared to the people I was reading about yesterday. I was reading about the English dissenters, which were the people which were the people that weren't part of the Anglican Church, and there were some like really crazy groups, right? Like people like who believe I was reading about the Quakers and I was reading about George Fox, and like obviously he's not as bad as Joseph Smith, but he read almost like Joseph Smith. Like it was like the guy didn't believe there was any of the legitimate churches that were forming Christ, so he goes on this like reforming, following what Christ said. So he just goes on like a personal mission to do it himself, and he starts teaching about this interior light stuff, and it gets really weird. And like later on, there's like a breakdown where one group of these Quakers thinks that the interior light leads you better than Scripture, and then you've got like the Socinians who don't believe like Jesus pre-existed in any way. Like at least the Arians will say that the Logos pre-existed. It was lunacy, right? Like you think that people like Calvin and Luther were crazy, right? Like I don't think Calvin was crazy personally. I think he was very wrong. Luther, I think, at least from what I've heard, and granted, I'm getting this from St. Alphonsus Liguori's History of Heresies, which is
that's a good book.
Yeah, it's a good book, but it's quite intense at times on the various reformers.
Yeah.
To put it mildly. Yeah, I understand Luther had a few mental problems. But like you go into these various reforming movements, and they're like, there was one guy I was reading about from the 18th century, a guy called Joseph Priestley, and he was like a full-on materialist, like Socinian. Like he didn't believe in the Trinity. He believed that like everything was matter and could be seen. And then tried to say that this was reconcilable with theism. Like it went completely. And then you had like proto-communist, movements during the Civil War. It was like lunacy.
Yo, guys! I think it's safe to say we've drifted off topic.
Right, yeah.
Well, I'm just so glad that I could read nuanced critiques from Luther. It's a very good trade-off. Of course, I'm just messing around.
Yeah, but I got two more super chats from Cringe Walker. For another $5. Most of Luther is untranslated. Just think of all the cringe I'll learn when they do. And another one for another $5. Still have access to Columbia Library. If any of you want a rent take out of Vatican docs, they have some nice New World writings by colonial bishops. We'll contact Cringe Walker if you want access to the Columbia Library, I guess. But sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say that. Gotta say, I prefer Calvin to Luther. For sure.
Yeah, no, John Calvin was pretty based, TBH.
I don't know about that, but I think, like, in terms of his sort of like, look, we need to go back to the covenant narratives. We need to do this. We need to do that. He was wrong, but the directions he wanted people to start looking back into and mapping back out, I think he was right about in the era that he lived in.
Yeah, I mean, what I unironically appreciate about like Orthodox Presbyterianism is that it's something that is radically unlike Catholicism, but not in like a cringe, not in like a really cringy way. Like, like evangelical, like modern evangelical mega churches are radically unlike Catholicism, but they're just cringe.
I think that the main reason for that is their rejection of holy orders, because really, like, honestly, like even their doctrine of the Eucharist is not that different, which may be a shock. The difference is that they're not like memorialists, right? They're not like Zwingli, who says that it's ultimately just a sign and there's no reality there at all. They say, like, when someone receives, they really do substantially and really, receive the Lord. But they say that in the elements themselves, there is merely a special virtue by receiving them, you receive that substance, rather than, transubstantiation, rather than the conversion of the substance of the two offerings into the heavenly substance. So, I mean, that's obviously a big difference, but people don't actually often know that we don't believe that that he is actually located where the sacrament is. He's really present, but under a sacramental mode. He's located in heaven. Like, a lot of people don't realize that we have a lot in common with them on that. We also have like similarities in our views on baptism, even, which is crazy because they don't believe in the same mode of efficacy of sacraments. That's crazy to me. Like, for example, Thomas says that when someone is baptized, if they lack the dispositions, they receive the mark, but not the life of grace, which they would say too. And they also say that that basically, like, they have some wacky views, like they believe that children of believers have like an immaculate conception or something. They're kind of weird like that. And that baptism just like enhances their faith and exhibits it, right? It gives them extra gifts. So they don't believe it's just a splash of water like Baptists often do.
Oh,
But,
yeah, I was
like,
reading about the Baptists yesterday, and it's making me angry reading.
It's weird. Why do they have that name? it's
like,
weird.
Like, no,
It's
the
false
weird thing is,
advertising.
like, the weird one is like the whole trail of blood thing that I stumbled on, right? Like, I was reading about apparently traditional Baptists, and there's a particular book called Trail of Blood. There's this school of I think it's called something like Baptist successionism, where they believe that they're
Baptist successionism.
they believe.
I know quite a bit about this. So Baptist successionism is the belief that you can trace a line of Baptists from the time of Christ until until today, or until the Protestant Reformation or whatever. I mean, it's clear that by the 1600s Baptists did exist. So if you can just get it up to there,
this
then
is one of the biggest memes. Like, how did you guys not know about this?
I know about it. I've known about it for a while. But no, what's really interesting about Baptist successionism is today you only get like really fundy Baptists that believe in this. People like Stephen Anderson. It's like it's pretty much just independent fundamentalist Baptists. Most modern normal Southern Baptists or other groups like that will not believe anything remotely like this. But Baptist successionism in the 1800s was the normative belief for Baptists. This is what the vast majority of them would have believed.
I kind of knew this.
Sorry, go ahead.
But like, I kind of knew this existed, but what I wasn't aware of was like the levels that they would go to justifying it, like saying that they were essentially represented in the Cathars, right? A dualist religious sects. Like how? Like I was reading through it. I'm like how
they claim the dualism is a
illiterate.
lie. They claim that they claim that we threw them heretical beliefs at these groups in order to in order to basically discredit them. So that no one would believe that they existed.
Yeah, but then we have their own writings, I think. We even have writings of the Cathars.
Yeah, their Latin.
Yeah, I know.
We have the Nag Hammadi as well.
But in all fairness, though, if you're like a Catholic who lives in the 1800s in America, and you're talking to like a Baptist who's been reading, who was it, John Dowling or Schmucker or Alexander Hislop, those idiots. It's not like you can go online and check the writings of the so I think they to quote what Michael often says about a certain person who I won't name, relies on the ignorance of the people they're talking to, because in that case they could.
Yeah. Actually, while we're at it, I have a question. Like, I've been digging into. Actually, this is more of a statement, really. This isn't really a question. Like, I was digging into the Quakers and the Methodists a bit more, and it strikes me as really strange. Like, the whole thing, like, they would be so obsessed with holiness, yet they're fully justified. Some of them believe, like some of them are like Calvinistic Methodists who believe, like, once saved, always saved, and then they're like obsessed with holiness. It's like, well, what's the point? You're already fully justified.
Well, there's a lot of reasons. Like, if you read into the Reformed Orthodox, they have lots of reasons for caring about it, because they have the distinction between title and possession, right? So just because you're justified doesn't mean you actually possess the sanctification that you need in order to be saved. It's just that you are predestined to eventually be, to basically have that sanctification and to persevere in it. They don't believe that it's impossible in principle, that there is a metaphysical impossibility of losing salvation. That's not true, right? They believe the warnings are real. They just believe that no one who ever actually finds faith is not predestined to persevere, if that makes sense. They don't believe
Right,
it's
yeah.
a theological possibility. They believe it's a metaphysical possibility.
Okay, yeah. The other point that I wanted to make, right, is that, you know, I'm reading these early Protestant movements, like, you know, particularly the Methodists, Quakers as well, and it strikes me as like a real melting pot for spiritual delusion. The whole thing, like particularly like the Hicksite Quakers, who believe that the interior light is more important than Scripture, right? Like this emphasis on religious experience, and that like you're going to experience it. It just strikes me as really strange and really, particularly without like a central juridical authority deciding what's true and what isn't.
Well,
That's
that's
actually
really dangerous.
well,
Sorry,
that's why. Well, I'm just going to say, when you think about it, I think the fact that those movements just show that Protestantism is a failed experiment. They keep having to correct themselves when the answer was right in front of them to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and for 300 years, and I mean, you can't even build a society on it.
Sure, but I do want to qualify, like you said, Al, like, you know, the Catholic living in the States who ends up reading all these Baptists and converting. It's actually, I think that 250 years ago, it was actually quite difficult to prove our claims because we didn't have the Hippolytan apostolic tradition proving that sacramental efficacy was there in the, you know, probably in the 2nd century for for holy orders. We didn't have we hadn't sifted between the spurious and the authentic letters of Ignatius, which, you know, are obviously like really important for our arguments. We didn't know that the Gelasian decretals were actually much earlier and came from Damasus. We didn't know lots of things that we know today that we can make a solid argument for. Like, I remember when I was first learning about Peter Lamp and people like this who make this argument that, oh, well, you know, the early Roman Church actually had lots of different presbyter bishops.
Yeah, that's so stupid. Yeah.
Yeah, but even if there were, like in Hippolytus's time, right? Even if there were multiple councils of presbyters with their own leaders, it's always been the case that even when there wasn't a strict monoepiscopate like we see under Pontian I, like Alan Brent says, right, there was always a chief bishop, right, a sort of representative bishop who represents the entire community of the faithful, of the whole city, to foreign populations. Even Eamon Duffy, who says, well, at one point there wasn't a bishop of Rome as we would say today, he admits that, like, you know, in Clement's time, they already had a sort of role of organizing relief efforts for foreign communities internally and getting the resources together and so on and so forth. And then you have like Francis Sullivan's book, which people often attack as this sort of liberal thing that undermines our claims. It doesn't. It doesn't undermine it at all, because when you have the context that Irenaeus is writing in 180 AD, right, 4 years after visiting the city of Rome himself. So the people he's speaking to are not stupid. They know their episcopal history, right? And then he writes in the famous book 3, chapter 3, about, you know, the succession of bishops in Rome. The fact that there were multiple, you know, if there were leaders of groups of priests in the city at the time, actually strengthens the argument for a special line of succession in this particular line, because Ignatius says, you know, it's in this succession, in this office, that we find this rule of orthodoxy in that chapter. So, you know, the whole work of people like Peter Lampe and so on, or Peter Lamp, or however you say his name, and actually in the end it ends up strengthening our argument, if true, because if the monoepiscopacy as we know it emerges with Pontian I at the end of Hippolytus's life, then what's going on 60 years before, where you have a man writing about, you have a bishop who was tied then to 3 locations, Ephesus and Lugdunum or Lyon and Rome, who acknowledges that, you know, everywhere knows that it's this city not that has primacy in a particular line of official succession in this city that has a what is it? Potentio principalitem, right? So if that's the case, then our argument is even stronger than it was before. So this is constantly happening. But I guess my point is that 250 years ago, you came across people who didn't have the resources and this progress hadn't been made. The reasons that they had to believe were not scholarly arguments. It wasn't access to the internet or books or whatever. It was that you would go to the liturgy and receive the sacraments, and you just knew. Some people know when they've been separated from the universal church. They just know. They can feel it, right? I think that ultimately a lot of it comes down to a real spiritual discernment, more so than just rational and scholarly arguments a lot of the time for some people. I don't know what you think of that.
Well,
The only evidence I need is the rosary.
Yes. If you don't pray the rosary every day, you're not on the team.
Bruh.
I mean, my argument was more
Don't bruh that. Come on.
Even from a position of natural law, my argument was more if you have all of these people in a society wandering around without any sort of central juridical authority, relying on religious experience, even if they're assisted by scripture, right? That sounds like a recipe for serious societal upheaval. That was more my argument. My argument wasn't so much about proving Rome's claims as much as saying this seems like a recipe for disaster on a political level.
Yeah. I'll just say it one more time because I just think it's so important. If you don't pray the rosary every day, you're not on the team. I don't care who says it. It's true.
So true.
There's other prayers.
But the other point here on the point of Protestantism, I was just wondering, I wonder if the chaos of mass public opinion that we have in this liberal era has anything to do with the Cambrian explosion of self-derived theologies in these thousands and thousands of sects.
I agree.
Probably completely unrelated.
By the way, I do like your Cambrian explosion analogy.
It literally is like that, except all of them are mutants and terrible.
Well, I mean, I don't think there's anything we can do about it. This is just the time we live in.
I see. It seems like Hassan and Renaissance have been on this point. It's there's no reason to think that any older age, hearken, the good old days before this era was any better. We can't do anything about this stuff.
Well, I didn't say that. I didn't say that. I'm saying that there's no golden age.
Sorry, computing said that. And you were saying this other point.
Yeah.
But
my apologies. Sorry, what did you say? I was reading. Somebody sent me some interesting stuff about women's role in the church just now. Yeah, what were you saying? Sorry,
I was just consolidating the points that you and Hassan were making. So Hassan was saying we can't really do anything about this Cambrian explosion of Protestantism. Obviously, that's true. And then you were also saying that it's kind of fallacious to think that there was this good old days period before the modern era where things weren't so degenerate or so things are now, where it's been like this all the time. And then also that we don't really have a explanation for why the specific example Hassan was bringing up was the example with the guy and the girlfriend, where people just think it's okay to ignore the moral law completely, especially in the sexual realm and everything. We don't have a historical explanation for that. To be honest, I do think that that's
not what I said. What I'm saying is that in theology itself, these things have fallen out of favor. They're not discussed. These issues are not part of church teaching for sure. The consensus of the theologians has moved away from the consensus that was held for over a millennium and a half. In terms of people's actual practice, it's always been this way. You can read, for example, in the Third Council of Aachen, which was a very long time ago, they say that it's almost unheard of for people to marry when they're still virgins.
Right. No, yeah, okay. So you were saying that it's you were saying that it was very difficult to put an explanation now for why it's fallen out of favor in the theological sphere. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that it's very difficult to explain why both in the theological sphere, in magisterium, and in education, in seminaries, it's fallen out. Basically, that it's just it's fallen out of favor systematically. And I think that probably the best argument I've seen is that moral theology is something that most heavily requires method derivation, and we've completely lost.
Sorry to cut you off, but Alan
Yeah.
says he has to go, and I want to give him a chance to shill before he leaves.
Yeah, no, thanks for. I just want to say, Settler, thanks for letting me on, inviting me on for the discussion. I do got to head now, though, and you can find me at alanruhl.com and my channel, Alan Ruhl, ALLANRUHL. But thanks for having me on, and God bless you all. Bye.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
See you, man.
Bye-bye.
So I'm sorry, Hassan. What were you saying?
Saying that moral theology is a thing that requires method to derive more than any other field in theology, right? And when you completely lose any conception of a ranking of what we call theological loci, you completely lose you completely lose your method of deriving it. And this is directly tied to something we discussed earlier, but the universal and ordinary teaching, right, which is infallible. People don't understand that anymore. They don't understand its role. They don't understand how you discern it from, just occasional fallible teaching that's probably wrong. Because people don't understand method, they don't understand, for example, what's often called like the primacy of liturgy, for example, which is why we have this concept lex credendi, lex orandi, right? We have these concepts that the rule of our prayer is the rule of our belief, right? When you lose the ranking of all the different authorities and not only what order they go in, but how those authorities are derived, why they're in that order, and so on. And when people are no longer educated in that, even in academia, then what ends up happening is that those fields that require method more than others, especially morality, they just fall apart. You don't have them anymore. So this is, I think, probably the most compelling reason I've seen for why this fell out of favor. And there's no real way to reclaim this other than to either restore the place of Latin in teaching or get, hundreds of works translated into, what is it, like, I think 7 different major languages that we use. So this is that's really not okay. And it's not going to be solved for a very long time until we figure something out methodologically about academia.
Okay, so on the population front, and I would actually believe personally that it has become more ubiquitous on the population front to like ignore a lot of these moral instructions, regardless of whether they are familiar with them or not, because of the enabling of technology. Of course, other eras it was ubiquitous, but the technology we have now really avoids the natural consequences of it. Obviously,
what moral laws? Okay, so what moral laws are in question here? Do you think?
Well, you were talking about sexual ethics there. I mean,
Yeah,
if you have contraception and if you have those pieces of new technologies, then it's going to,
Yeah, I'm not talking about contraception. I'm talking about like even making physical contact with the opposite sex.
Right. Well, no. I would agree with that too.
Yeah.
I'm saying that. Well, it doesn't have to be a slippery slope from it's more acceptable to touch people, and then that leads to fornication. But perhaps from the reverse direction of when you have contraception and those enabling technologies, the most extreme thing is not so scary anymore. So people are less resistant to going farther down that risk curve of going farther and farther in terms of what they're doing.
Sure.
But aside from that, because you weren't really talking about the population, we're talking about the theologians and all that stuff. Seems like you were giving like an internal, like within the church, there's they haven't been using Latin, and they're not using the right methodology in order to intellectually figure this out. perhaps technically there's no non-theological explanation of that, but technically, perhaps, let's say the church is the petri dish here, and we have an external agent that came into the petri dish, and that's kind of part of the explanation of the fungus. So, I mean, if you have all these, if you have all these Western nations and post-Enlightenment, I'm not going to blame it all on the Enlightenment, by the way, but if we have all these post-Enlightenment nations where it becomes normalized to have secular states, and we have this general process where all other non-state institutions that govern people's life are being swallowed up by those states, such as education, family, etc. Combine that with the fact of, when you have these secular states, it causes a religious vacuum where there needs to be a religious, legitimating kind of thing that vivifies the regime. And when you don't have that, it just doesn't work. So obviously, I mean, what happened in Western society is that an informal state church came in and replaced that role, and it's infecting this church, and there's political and malicious motivations in order to suppress the moral theology. Now, that's a kind of weird non-theological explanation for it. Might be out of the radar or your purview with that, but I would say that's my explanation.
No, well, I mean, I agree with you. I think that all these sort of anthropological and technological factors have a big effect. But in terms of the actual teaching, right, I want to give you an example.
Okay.
In Iran, during the time of the Shah, the last Shah, there was a growing sort of weird middle class, which didn't care about religion at all. And you had Western markets trying to sell to the Iranian people what they called white beef, which is pork. And it didn't work. Barely anyone bought it. It was just this weird, swelling, irreligious middle class that bought it. Why didn't more people buy it? Why didn't the availability of this artificially cheap food, which was there to destroy the religiosity of the country, why didn't it work? Why didn't stuff like this work? It didn't work because although you are correct that these factors are real factors with real effects, it's not sufficient. If you have a country with a strong anthropological foundation, right, with a strong foundation of kinship, and where families have a strong relationship with religious authorities, it's not going to work. You could expose a population to contraceptives that has a very strong relationship with a moral foundation that says that they should not be used, but cannot be used without completely falsifying your relationship with your spouse, without telling your spouse or your partner, whatever, without basically telling them, I don't really love you and I'm not willing to give my whole self to you, right? If people genuinely believe that, they wouldn't fall into these things. And at least if they did, people would hate them for it, or at least think that it's a socially detestable act. It didn't happen. It didn't happen when it came about in the West, because there was already a massive amount of damage to the extended family in the West, and many other things that had occurred for the couple of 100 years before the introduction of these mass available vices, right? So
Right.
while I agree with you that these things are true, there are additional factors that predate and are often sort of the legacy of theological problems, which are not, they don't seem to be immediately relevant, but down the line they have a clear effect. So, like when you have a restructuring of our population where clan ties matter less, like who your great-great-grandfather is stops mattering because you don't have common assets or common work with the other people who are your cousins, second cousins, and third cousins anymore. You may not even share an intelligible common name because your surname is something like Smith or Tanner, and it's just a profession, right? There's nothing that actually tells you about who you are there, right? When things like this happen, you basically it's a sort of destruction of the source of power and networking for people who have to do physical labor and who are the lower parts of society. Their power manifests through strong family relationships, and their main power comes from, and I think that recent magisterium is fantastic on this, and also the more orthodox strains of liberation theology, like the theology of the people faction in Argentina, and things like that. They really do. They really do like cotton on to these things and say, look, spiritual upliftment and the moral teaching of religion is what really helps to give these people power and bind them together, not only in a natural sense, but in the true sense, really having something to die for, not alone, but with each other. And that's what we lost in Western culture, is this crazy, this crazy sort of deterioration of the real family, a situation where monarchy doesn't make any sense but anymore, because you're not tangibly ethnically related to your monarch. He's not really an ethnarch anymore. Nothing like that. When these relationships fall apart, no wonder many concepts, even liturgically, become completely inaccessible. For example, like the Feast of Christ the King, and also like monarchical descriptions of the Lord in general, are very difficult for most modern people to access, because there's just no interface to understand them apart from Lord of the Rings or something, right? It's very difficult to understand these principles and how they relate to real life and how they relate to our family lives, how they relate to how our daily work should go. People don't understand that, if you want to repair these things, if you have cousins and second cousins you don't talk to, reunite your family. If you can, maybe start a formal corporation that makes your family into a legal entity, a legal person. Start a common education fund for your extended family. Do something, right? Bring your family back together. Bringing your extended family back together and giving them real moral underpinnings and a real spiritual underpinning, making intergenerational networks between extended families that do this, is how we're going to get anywhere. We're not going to get anywhere by making these personal friendships on the internet and talking about the Latin Mass or something. We're going to do it by doing this and passing it on to a long-term intergenerational network, not of individuals, but of personal relationships that evolve into relationships between families in a real established relationship between many extended families. So we become a real people. So we have real weight in the world. We're not going to get anywhere otherwise. These things will all be theory forever.
What you need to do? You know what you need to do? You need to meet your internet friends, and you need to go to like hostels and meet.
Well, I mean, personally, I think our best way at forming a based trans society is if we all meet up and go find some uninhabited island in the Pacific, and there we can restore Western civilization.
Well, I completely agree with the idea that we should be in the world and not of it, right? So, like the horrible Western city that we live in today, that's what's the phrase that the harvest is ready, but there aren't enough workers? What's the quote exactly from Scripture?
The harvest is great, but the workers are few.
Yeah, thank you. So that's kind of the situation that we're in the Western world. We have so many people who don't stand for anything, and who are lost and are grasping out for something and really think there's nothing to grasp onto.
Man, this literal, what you're describing in other terms could be described as literally capitalist alienation. And Seller's comment is true. It's like I'm becoming way more sympathetic to Maoist distributist liberation theology. Man,
So
like the alienation, the industrialization destroying social ties between workers and family ties. Man, it is real.
There are some secret-based gems in the Catholic social teaching stuff, right? Really hardcore stuff, right? Like there's one by Pope St. Paul VI called Progressio Populorum or something like that. I've got the book on
Yeah,
my
all the way
desk,
around.
right?
Other than that's correct.
Oh, is it? Yeah.
Progressio. Yeah.
I mean, it's the same. It's Latin, right? And he's like arguing like there are certain cases where you can like, if you're like, obviously if it's like gravely against the common good, like there are certain times when you can overthrow the government, right? You read through Quadragesimo Anno, and he's arguing for like really strong rules on just wages. And you see him, like you see Leo XIII just blanketly condemning, and it's the same with Pius XI, and they're just blanketly condemning unrestricted capitalism and socialism in very, very blunt terms. Like, it's incredibly blunt terms.
Yeah, this is one of the many criticisms I have of the trad community. And I want to be clear for one thing for the trads. Okay, I'll explain the joke for trads who really just can't get it. When I say I'm anti-trad or I hate tradition, the joke I'm making is I have had trads say stuff to me like, "Do you hate Saint Pius X?" For criticizing the SSPX. So the joke I'm making when I say I'm anti-trad or I hate tradition is that a lot of trads seem to think that I hate tradition because I have problems with their movement. But I am actually deeply sympathetic to the trad movement, and that's the only reason I do criticize them. I'm not on here criticizing Father James Martin because I don't really care about his movement. I don't feel like there's really much commonality between me and him. I do feel like there's a lot of commonality between me and trads. That's why I have problems with the 5%, 10% difference.
That's I agree so much with that, because the thing is, right, our grassroots are being leached by these people, right? Like the people who think like us, who could be on our side doing great things, they're getting vultured into certain podcasts and whatever, where they don't do anything and they just complain all day. They don't.
It's miserable.
Yeah, they don't mobilize to improve things. It's not just prayer. Prayer is important, but what comes after oratio is actio. If you know anything about the spiritual tradition, if you know anything about the mental prayer tradition, you know that you cannot just forge the sword and leave it in the scabbard. That's not what prayer is. You take your prayers, you make resolutions, especially in the early stages of prayer. You make your resolutions and you go and act them out. You don't only conquer some vice, but you discern with God, where do you want me? How do you want me there? What do you want me doing there? With who? For what purpose? This is what prayer is about. It's not just, you can't just sit in your bedroom, right? Even monastics don't do that for the most part. This is not the way that you do things. The way that you do things are, especially since we're lay people, you get together with and reforge your diocesan community. You make it into a real community, even if it's just your local deanery, even if it's just the few parishes around the area where you're going to be living for a few years, right?
Oh, you're drowning again.
Yeah, you're drowning again, Hassan.
Okay, I'm saying that you have to reforge the diocesan community. And you do that by actually making connections and mobilizing with people and forming the catechetical reading groups where you meet together every now and then and you talk through something that you're reading locally, not just online, right? And the things that you're reading are not just contemplative stuff. It's not just like hard theology or whatever. It's how to get things done practically in your lives and in your community's life, right? You go through recent magisterial things. The fact that magisterial literacy for post-Vatican II teaching is so low in our communities is pathetic. We've been doing this for over a year. Why haven't we done more? Especially in our local communities, especially with people who think like us, who are near us. Why haven't we done it? And why aren't we mobilizing to get other people interested? Why aren't we figuring out how the liturgy could be better outside of the TLM? How it could be a sort of what we can call a holy mediocrity within the bounds of what the new rubrics allow. Why
Actually, yeah, like I complained about this in my most recent video? It was one of the more recent ones about saving the church in England in 3 steps, right? Like there is, I think a lot of it is an overemphasis on political topics, right? There are a lot of spiritual problems that people have, and a lot of the political action can be solved a lot better by reading books like The Three Ages of the Interior Life, like probably the single best spiritual book I've ever read, by consistently reading the scripture, by not just praying the rosary every day, but looking into things like maybe the divine office, getting into the habit of mental prayer, things like that, and daily mass. Daily mass will change you.
Yeah, honestly, I did that for a few weeks at one point when it was easy to do so, and I wasn't like obstructing old people from getting positions to go, and it was probably one of the most important things I've ever done for my life. So you mentioned the divine office. I don't think people realize that it's not some weird modern thing for lay people to use the office. This is the original tradition, right? This was the early tradition. It's part of what it came about for. It's not just a monastic thing, although it evolved into that. The prayer of the Psalms and so on is part of the lay Jewish tradition from the time of Second Temple Judaism, and from the time of the transition of Christianity out of being something with more Jewish liturgy.
Yeah, so let me explain, for the sake of the people here, what the modern divine office essentially consists in. It consists in matins, which is basically a set of psalms. I think there are 4 of them. No, there's 4 of them, there's 4 of them, and you get like a reading from the Church Fathers or from some theologian with it. So you'll get like John Chrysostom, or I've seen Aelred of Rievaulx. You get these readings and you read along. And then there's the 2 major hours. There is Lauds and there's Vespers, which are 3 psalms, an introductory hymn, and a canticle with a reading and like additional prayers for people. And then you've got these 4 smaller hours. You've got the 3 minor hours during the day, terces, which means third hour, which is 9 a.m. You've got sects, which is for 12, and then you've got nonas, which are for the 9th hour, which is 3 p.m. And you get 3 psalms for that, and then additional readings. They're a bit shorter. And then you've got compline, which is, I believe, one hymn, 1 psalm. There's a hymn for the minor hours as well. And then there's a short canticle. And it should take you each day around about maybe an hour, if that, right? It's something that will, knowing the psalms very well, it completely changes the way that you mentally pray, and it changes the way that you perceive reality. Because one of the things I think that is apt to remember is that the psalms are part of the wisdom literature for a reason. They teach you how to live life, and they teach you about the nature of God. So if you're spending your time, and you will learn the psalms by heart if you do it for long enough, right? Mm-hmm. It will change the way that you think, and it will change the way that you address God in prayer. It will completely change it. And I think that it's something that people should do more. It's sometimes, if it's a little bit expensive, there's a website called divinumofficium.com. That is divine. I'll type it in the chat for the benefit of people here.
It's the old version, though, isn't it? They don't have the modern form.
I think they do, don't they? I think they have They have up to 1962 at the very least.
Yeah, that's not the recent one.
Don't they have a Novus Ordo? Yeah, there's the Universalis as well.
Yeah, that's the one that I posted is the modern form. They called it the Liturgia Orarum instead of Divinum Officium on the new form. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so with respect to things like this, I don't think a lot of people realize, but Sacrosanctum Concilium, which is the constitution on the liturgy from the Second Vatican Council, says that on feast days and Sundays, the evening divine office hour, called Vespers, should be prayed by members of the congregation, especially with the presbyter, on each of them, on feast days and Sundays. Barely ever done. And if we can get practices like this going, we can get lay people realizing that they're not just consumers, because a lot of people seem to think that like the presbyters are like liturgy slaves who are just there to like be dispensers of the sacraments for us, and we're just like receiving end. We're like end of chain for grace, which is insane. Basically, many people have this weird like passive reception view of the laity. They don't understand, you know, we have a real task of going out and sanctifying the temporal order through family and through work and through catechesis and things like this and through evangelization. We have all of these roles, and these are not just optionals, right? Each of these things are mandatory. Each of those 4 things, right, in different capacities according to who you are and you know, what your abilities are and so on. Like these things are really important. They need to be they really need to be inserted into the life of the particular community, which is the diocese, and also local deaneries, segments of the presbyterium in the diocese, and small groups of parishes working together. You can get together with groups of people who think like you in your area and raise money to hire out a conference hall and invite a speaker to come give you guys talks on what active participation really means, stuff like that. Because, you know, a lot of this may be shocking to some of you. You may not realize this phrase like actuosa participatio. That's actually from Pius X. That's not some new idea from Vatican II or the newer reform movement or the 60s committee that put together the reforms. And even before the name active participation came along, it was already a principle in moral theology. You can read Alphonsus Liguori's moral theology on the 3rd precept on the obligation to observe the Lord's Day. And he says the best way to ensure that you don't get distracted to the point of potentially even not actually fulfilling the precept to hear Mass, because you can actually turn up to Mass and not hear Mass. Like you can fail your Sunday obligations sitting in church while a Mass is going on. Some people don't realize that. The best way to avoid that, the most salutary way to participate in the liturgy is to follow along in the missal with the celebrant's prayers and unite your intention to him, both during the times where you speak out loud, when you sing, and when you simply listen in silence and unite yourself mentally to what he's saying or what he's doing. That's what active participation is. Active participation isn't loud signs of peace or waving your arms during the Pater Noster. It's none of this kind of stuff. Active participation is entering into the liturgy mentally, prayerfully. You know, like the Virgin Mary, it always says, and she pondered these things in her heart. That's active participation. That's active participation. Earlier I was talking about the sacramentality of woman. This is what it is. During the liturgy, you become a daughter of Jerusalem. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, right? What do the Old Testament scriptures say? What does St. John of the Cross say? The soul, in relation to God, acts as feminine. It's a daughter of Jerusalem. It's a bride of the Messiah, right? Cleave to God, scripture says, which is the same language used for married couples. Cleave to your husband, right? This reality of imitating femininity in worship is necessary for us. That's what active participation is, right? It's got nothing to do with making loads of noise. It's not to do exclusively with external expressions of prayer. There's some of that because it can help you to participate inwardly. It can help you to focus. But the moment that, like you'll see, lots of people know that this happens in modern parishes. No one looks at the missal. No one follows along. They don't think that they need to. Why should they? They've memorized everything they need to say out loud. They know all the things. Why would they follow along? But then they miss out on lots of things. They miss out on the silent prayers. They miss out on the meanings of certain actions. They miss out on contemplating certain things. So no one's ever going to ask their pastors questions about these things. So the homilies are never going to improve. We have a lot of things on us. right? It's not just a matter of getting the people above us to do a better job, which is the most stupid way to think of things possible. Oh well, my bishop does this or he does that. Oh, my priest, he sucks in this way or that way. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. You have a job on your side. You have your own reasons to do certain things. It's not all about complaining about what people above us shouldn't be doing that they're doing or should be doing that they're not doing. What are you supposed to be doing? Do you know? Do you know what your job is? Are you
So
sure?
there's a question. There's a question in the chat about this because you were talking about obviously fostering this, contributing to your local parish and community. So expat Theocrat says, helping your local parish is all well and good, but some folks are stuck in parishes with guitar masses, crazy liberal pastors, and clueless parishioners who view traditionalism as a fringe ideology. What would you advise to this expat Theocrat?
I'd say this, in situations like that, parish hopping is okay. If it's really bad, but even if you do, don't write everyone off, because even someone with some clueless, funny views, you may be able to get them interested in some of the less on-the-nose stuff, right? Something I've noticed is this. If you get an acquaintance with conciliar and post-conciliar magisterial texts, and you get people interested in looking into them, and you make sure that they're looking at the footnotes and the references and quotations, suddenly they realize that there isn't this big division between before and after as they thought. Suddenly they realize that all the way through you have references back to Pius XII's Mediator Dei, you have references to Tra le Sollecitudini, you have references back to much older documents, you have references back to Aquinas and Scotus, Giles of Rome. You have all sorts of things going on. So it's not, they will quickly realize that what they have is not some new denomination born in the 60s, which is how some people treat it, even though that they rationally know it's not that way, right? A lot of the time you can get some of these people who you may, although I'm not saying you definitely are, you may be writing off some of these people who you could help to discover more in something where they think that they've found what they're looking at. They know what the mass is, they know this stuff, and it's much shallower than the reality that you know that it is, right? But first of all, that's the first point. Don't write people off. Second, go to many parishes. If they're all kind of terrible, go to many of them, right? The local ones nearby, even if there's only like 4, right? And see if you can basically get acquainted with the minority of people. There will be a few in each of those parishes who's more congenial to our way of looking at things. You don't go in and start talking about communion of the hand. You take it slow, right? Take it slow. Suggest things that, read this, and next week we'll both have read it and we can talk about it.
Muffled again.
Oh,
It's good.
okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm saying you go to, you say, hey, read, you build a rapport with people, you make friends, you go to external social events, you play sports with them, or you go see a movie, you go get coffee, something. It doesn't all have to be about religion, right? Just make friends, have real community, right? Then you go to these people and you bind them together, this inter-parish small minority group of people who you've got a slight interest in these things in, and you start a book club or something, really like a magisterial document club or something. And eventually, the Vatican will radicalize these people. Trust me, I've seen it before. I've seen people who are kind of normies who've now completely changed. I know old ladies from my parish who've become a lot more old-fashioned in their views on devotion and things like that. And they're not like, they're not one of us, right? But there's progress. Don't
One of us. Sorry.
Yeah, you don't have to bring people all the way through. But if you can help a few people a little bit, you've done something. And if you go regularly to the 4 communities around you nearby to where you live, and you do something, you've done something better than nothing. right? So there's always something to do. There's always something to do, even if there's crazy guitar masses and whatever. You got to remember, a lot of people actually don't know that there is more other than scary TLM people, right? A lot of people don't know that there is more to the tradition than just the kind of people they stereotypically associate with a TLM, if they even know about it. So that's my advice for people in situations like that.
And just for viewers themselves, I don't think this kind of caricature of the crazy trad that's like, ooh, the missal, it's wrong missal and it's in the communion on hand, and they're just obsessed with like not trivialities, but this kind of weird minutia stuff that's off-putting to the regular person. I think it's a squeaky wheel phenomenon where, you know, there's 5-10% of the people that are kind of like that. You know, obviously everybody's a little kooky because they're a trad parish, but most of them, like the normie, like Latin mass goers, are just like, they just have large families and they're just like, you know, naturally based and stuff. And so I think the quintessentially judgmental kind of autistic people are really a small minority, and you know, they need to be like crowded out by these just based big family people, these just awesome old ladies, all that stuff.
Yeah.
I would also say,
go ahead.
I would also say is that this isn't always possible with everybody, but the more people that you can get into mental prayer and the more people you can give good meditation material to, the better. And if you can get them to the habit of doing that every day, that's going to help them a great deal, because it will help to stabilize their passions and it will help them to grow in the life of virtue a lot better. And that's going to make them naturally easier to deal with.
St. Alphonsus Liguori's On Mental Prayer, short book, easy read. I read it, very helpful. It'll just teach you how to do it. Because, mental prayer, meditation, this is scary. How do I do it correctly? He just explains it very simply, and if you just find that online or at, you know, your parish, they probably have it in the gift shop. That is an easy read that's accessible to people, unlike some of these documents that they might be referring to.
There's also another one called, I've never read this, but I've heard I seem to recall it. It's called The Ladder of Monks by Guido II, the Carthusian. And it's a 12th century guide, I believe, to Lectio Divina. Right? So that'll teach you how to meditate on scripture.
You know, I want to read something that John Paul II said in 1998 on an ad limina visit from the bishops of the Northwestern United States Episcopal Conference, right? And what he said was, full participation certainly means every member of the community has a part to play in the liturgy. In this respect, a great deal has been achieved in parishes and communities across your land. But full participation doesn't mean everyone does everything. That would lead to a clericalization of the laity and the laicization of the priesthood. This wasn't what the council had in mind. The liturgy, like the church, is intended to be hierarchical, polyphonic, respecting different roles assigned by Christ, allowing all the different voices to blend into one hymn of praise. Active participation certainly means that in gesture, word, song, and service, all members of the community take a part in worship, which is anything but inert or passive. Yet, active participation doesn't preclude the active passivity of silence, stillness, and listening. Indeed, it demands it. Worshippers aren't passive, for instance, when they listen to the readings or the homily, or they follow the prayers of the celebrant and the chants and the music. These are experiences of stillness and silence, but they're in their own way profoundly active. And this is the next part, which links into what Elliot was just saying. In a culture which neither favors nor fosters meditative quiet, the art of interior listening is learned only with difficulty. Here we see how the liturgy, though it must always be properly enculturated, must also be countercultural. So I just want people to keep in mind, like, mental prayer is not like one thing and the liturgy is another thing. What computing is talking about here is necessary for properly praying with the Mass. This is another thing Pius X said. Don't pray at Mass, pray the Mass. It's not just for priests to do, it's for you, right? You're not just doing any act of worship in there, you're taking part as a congregant in the liturgy. You're supposed to
Yeah.
pray,
Yeah,
right?
do you think the disciples were sat there and just waiting for Jesus to just sort of deposit the sacrament? No, they were taking part in the whole thing. They even sung the prayer, didn't they?
Right. So yeah, I mean, this is the thing. Like, meditative prayer is integral to all other prayer. There's another thing he mentioned, Lectio Divina. One of the greatest ways to enter into Lectio Divina, other than the reading, which is important, I completely agree, is practically, gradually inserting it into your life. If you already have a rosary devotion, try a scriptural rosary. That will enter you into how to contemplate a mystery in the context or through the lens of a particular verse. And then when you get into that, you can understand why we have readings at Mass. It's because every combination of readings and propers allows you to approach the Eucharist when you see him during the consecration and the elevation through a different lens on every day of the liturgical calendar. And you don't just look at it through these preset lenses of the propers and the lections. If you meditate on these verses before you go, right? Before you go, every morning before you go to Mass, you meditate on the verses and the propers, right? You turn up, you listen to the lections, and you have meditations ready-made that you offer, right? You add those meditations alongside the offering of the priest, right? And what you get is that you approach the Eucharist then through the readings, through the propers, and through your meditations on them. And you see him in a new light every time you go. Every single time you go. The liturgy should not become a monotony where you do the same thing every day, every year. It should be completely different, because you should bring yourself as you are on that day and the meditations on the readings and the propers for that day. And this is part of what active participation is. This is one of the things that Vatican II on liturgy was calling for. It wasn't calling for altar girls and EMHCs and lay lectors and mass, versus populum. It wasn't asking for cringy Protestant music. It wasn't asking for so-called equivalent hymns replacing the propers. It wasn't calling for a clown mass. It wasn't calling for any of these things. It was calling for us to be formed in the liturgy and enter into it whenever we go. That was the point. That's why vernacular was being supported, so we could enter into it better. Well, whether or not you think that worked is down to you, but the aim was to help us to enter into it better. And this is one of the major takeaways, is that this is not a jarring change, right? This is not a jarring movement in emphasis. We've been talking about, in the tradition, we've been talking about developing lay participation in liturgical prayer for about 400 years. It's in Trent, right? Trent says people need to start receiving frequently, and they should receive from the host consecrated in that liturgy, not just using the convenience of the tabernacle. That's what it says, because beforehand people weren't doing that. There was actually this really strange period of time where adoration was actually the main form of worship, and the Mass was like the soundtrack, like something going on in the background that sometimes happens while you're at adoration. It was really weird, right? People wouldn't pay attention to what was going on in the liturgy at all, and that's not supposed to be the way that it is. So that's another thing to think about, is that there has been a continuous trajectory of development for hundreds of years that we are part of and that Vatican II is part of, but it's been misused. And like I was saying in the chat, certain people tried to use this council, not its texts, but the historical event, as an excuse to inaugurate their own discontinuous with the tradition sort of idea of what the religion should be. And they tried to use the council as an excuse to put it into effect and to start teaching it in seminaries and to start giving homilies based on it and to start ad-libbing the liturgy and all sorts of things. And the worst of that we saw in the early 70s, and it's actually got better since then. Like a lot of the excesses, a lot of the crazy abuses happening in the 70s have become very rare. So we are moving forward. Things can get better, and stop complaining and thinking things are only going to get worse, because you yourself can be part of improving things. And we have to do that. We have to mobilize. That's kind of like my main thing that I want people to take away.
Thanks for that, Hassan. White pilled again. Elliot is gone. Just got a message from him. So he's gone now. Everyone, make sure, remember, go subscribe to Computing the Soul. His channel's in the description. And I think we're going to be wrapping up here now. So does anyone have any final thoughts?
Yes, I do. I have something I think is very important. Can I screen share it?
Yeah, right.
Share screen of. I hope I show the right one. Okay, so here we go. Yeah. All right. You know, we went through a lot of topics, a lot of minutia. But I would say there's 50 live people here at the end of it, and boy, are they lucky. They are quite privileged, because this is the elephant in the room, the most important thing probably that we might talk about this entire stream, except for all the stuff Hassan said, but still super, super important. And it's called the 9 First Fridays devotion. And so this devotion was revealed and became a common tradition that people do in the church. And basically what you do is you, let me zoom in, you receive faithfully on 9 consecutive First Fridays. 9 consecutive First Fridays. Christ appeared to St. Margaret Mary and gave 12 promises about when people consecrate themselves to the Sacred Heart. And there's a particular promise when you do the 9 First Fridays, 9 First Fridays consecutive months. So the last promise here, let me zoom into it. In the excess of the mercy of my heart, I promise you that my all-powerful love will grant to all those who will receive communion on the First Fridays for 9 consecutive months the grace of final repentance. They will not die in my displeasure, nor without receiving the sacraments, and my heart will be their secure refuge in this, their last moment. And there's lots of cases where people have done this and it seemed like they weren't going to get their sacraments. For example, in a near fatal car accident, but they always end up having a priest run in and give them their sacraments. The second to last one is my favorite one, though, obviously, because persons who propagate this devotion shall have their names eternally written in my heart, never to be blotted out. So, 9 First Fridays, consecrate yourself to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, consecrate yourself to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, pray rosaries daily, or you're not on the team. 9 First Fridays, that's all I have to say.
Okay, thanks very much for that, 21st. And 21st, you do have a channel also, so should people subscribe to that?
I guess. I really I've been busy with the DeFi stuff, but I'll probably make more videos at some point in time. I'm just in a hiatus for as long as Quasington is. I just life.
People also wanted me to tell you that crypto is cringe, by the way.
People?
So some people from Discord. But that's Hassan, did you have anything else you wanted to say?
No, but It was good to be on. It was good to meet Alan Rule for the first time. That was kind of cool. Also, talking to you guys has been good. I don't really get to talk to you guys at the same time very often. And I mean, it was good to, when we went through at least some stuff to do with the Motu proprio in the beginning. I think it's really good to get opportunities to talk about that without people getting emotional on either side, because I constantly see that. Yeah, I was glad to be here, and I hope that hopefully we helped a couple of the viewers who, finding it difficult to pass what's been going on recently,
Yep, definitely. Thank you everyone for joining us. As 21st says, pray the rosary, you're not on the team. And yeah, thanks everyone. Good night.
Good night.